Welcome to yet another edition of the Daily Report. It's Wednesday, December 8th here in Korea. Health officials have recorded fresh highs in both their tallies of new infections and severe cases. I have Kwon So standing by with details on that. So welcome.
Hi, Sunny.
Right, let's begin with the actual numbers for this Wednesday here on the local front then.
Let's do that, Sunny. Korea has posted more than 7,000 new COVID-19 infections. For the first time that Korea is surpassing 7,000. It's 7,175 to be exact. Those have been tallied as of 12 a.m. in the past 24 hours. And it includes more than 7,140 domestic transmissions and 33 cases from abroad. And if we take a look at our graph, it is a huge jump from the day before and also an on-week jump by more than 2,000 cases from last Wednesday. And on average, cases have been at around 5,000 in the past week. And we are seeing record high figures in many places across the country, especially with infections concentrated in the metropolitan region. Here is Seoul, close to 3,000 cases. And in all places across the region, we've got at least a double-digit figures of daily infections. With that, Korea has so far confirmed 489,484 cases and 63 additional fatalities have raised the death toll to above 4,000. Now let's move over to the number of patients that are currently in serious or critical condition. That's been in above 700 for a week, and now we're seeing another high here at 840. Let's take a look at the vaccination figures now. We've got a little over 37,400 people who got their first jab yesterday and more than 41,900 who got their second jab. And additional doses, that number is higher here. Close to 290,000 people have been administered with a booster shot on Tuesday. Now let's move over to the figures abroad. We've got a rise by more than 694,000 new infections worldwide and also more than 8,900 new fatalities. Now let's take a closer look at some countries abroad that are seeing resurgences. France here at 7.9 million cases has posted more than 59,000 new infections, over 51,000 new cases in Germany. And then we've got here South Africa at more than 3 million cases in total, which has posted some 13,000 new COVID-19 cases in the past day. And those are the general updates I have for now, but I'll see you back in a bit. Sunny?
Right, so thank you for now. Right, so concerns are mounting on the local front given the heavier caseload, limited hospital capacity and the potential risks of the new variant. I have Shin Yeon here in the studio with more on that. Yeon, welcome back.
Thank you for having me, Sunny.
Right, so I hear the Prime Minister has addressed the latest situation. Let's begin with that.
You're right. So the Prime Minister made no secret as of how serious our current situation is, and he shared a few details on how the government is planning to respond. Take a listen to what he said a few hours ago.
We've seen a sharp jump in daily infections, and our medical capacity is quickly running short.
Accordingly, the Prime Minister said the country would make greater use of home treatment for patients with less severe illnesses. To make treatment at home less inconvenient and demanding, the Prime Minister proposed changing the number of days that patients and their quarantined family members need to be monitored from 10 to 7 days. He also said financial aid would be handed out to patients in home treatment based on the size of each household. COVID-19 pills will also be given to those in the high-risk category being treated at home from early next year. Apart from home treatment, the Prime Minister asked unvaccinated teens and seniors eligible for booster shots to get their shots. He also urged people to get tested if they have any suspected symptoms to help contain the spread of the virus, especially the Omicron variant.
Right, Yeon, and staying with the Omicron, have we seen any more cases?
We definitely did. On Wednesday, we added 2 more cases, bringing the total figure to 38. What's more worrisome is that some of the Omicron infections we've witnessed so far were transmitted very easily. One person was infected by simply staying at the same restaurant visited by an Omicron patient. As a matter of fact, they only came into contact for 1 to 2 minutes. And indeed, health authorities say that Omicron seems to be much more transmissible than the Delta variant. They also raised the possibility of airborne transmissions, which means the variant could be spread over longer distances, even without close contact.
Right, and beyond national borders, Yeon, how many countries have reported Omicron infections as we speak?
Well, according to various reports, at least 52 countries have seen Omicron cases. The number of those infected with this strain has surpassed 1,360. Now, if we take a look at individual countries, in South Africa, where Omicron was first detected, the variant is now the country's dominant strain. Genetic sequencing of patient samples conducted in November showed that nearly 3/4 of them were Omicron variant infections. The UK has been one of the worst hit countries in Europe, reporting 437 cases so far. Denmark has also witnessed a community-level outbreak, registering a total of 398 cases. The Maldives have also seen its first case of the Omicron variant on Tuesday. A tourist from South Africa who arrived in the country on November 27th had been infected with the variant. Now, this tourist had come before the Maldivian government banned travel to the Maldives from 8 countries in Africa, including South Africa. Now, Israel, which is home to one of the highest vaccination rates in the world, is also reporting fresh Omicron cases. The number of Omicron variant cases rose to 21, as you mentioned, on Tuesday, and the health ministry said of the 21 cases, 13 were fully protected, which in Israel means anyone who has received a booster shot, recovered from COVID-19, or received their initial 2 vaccine shots within the past 6 months.
Right, Ian, thank you for now. Stay with us for the broader talks. Back on the local front, during their briefing on this Wednesday morning, health authorities spoke at length about the jump in cases and the challenges ahead. I have Soa here at the desk. Soa.
Yes, Sunny. So officials are attributing this surge to a number of factors and say it is a combination of, first off, the Wednesday factor, as we usually see a jump happening by the middle of the work week, and also the rising continuous trend in COVID-19 infections in the current wave. Also, the effects of recently strengthened social distancing measures have yet to show in the next week or two. And also an official mentioned that it is currently too early to say whether the new emergence of the Omicron variant has to do with this surge, because more contact tracing has to be done. And according to Son Young-nae, a senior health ministry official this Wednesday, today's jump in cases is not the only factor that we should focus on.
We're placing more importance on the overall trend rather than case counts on particular days. Looking at the bigger picture does show us that the outbreak is widening, while the proportion of elderly patients hasn't gone down. We believe this is a dangerous sign and therefore are closely monitoring further developments.
And the number of senior patients has to be brought down through additional vaccinations, is what authorities keep stressing. According to Son, infection rates have been going down at nursing hospitals and nursing facilities, where more than 80% of seniors aged 60 and above have received their booster shots. While the elderly make up around 35% of total COVID-19 cases recently, those in their 60s or older account for close to 84% and 96% of serious to critically ill patients and COVID-19 related deaths, respectively. While officials say administering more boosters may lead to declining figures in critically ill patients in weeks from now, right now they are also continuing to secure more hospital beds and medical staff. Until the end of this year, more than 1,900 beds are expected to be added. As of this Wednesday, close to 79% of ICU beds are in use nationwide and 84.5% in the metropolitan region. Now, Son Young-nae also added, although there is capacity left, what also needs to be considered is the number of medical personnel that are able to deal with critically ill patients, and also the time needed for patients to shift to different hospital beds or different venues. And that's becoming especially more and more difficult in the metropolitan region.
Right, of course. So what appear to be the prospects with regard to further hikes in transmissions for the days ahead now?
Right, after hitting that 7,000 milestone, there have been questions raised at the briefing whether we could even hit the 10,000 mark in daily infections. And officials have been earlier mentioning that they are going to be able to manage patients even if we have around 10,000 cases a day. Now, here's the government. Here is what the government can, or rather cannot, predict at this point.
It's difficult to say with any certainty if our daily case counts could top the 10,000 mark using the forecasting model we have now. Our simulation data is generated by a wide range of variables with different outcomes, so we can't give you any definitive answers on whether that threshold will be crossed, and if so, when. The important thing to consider is if our healthcare system is prepared if the number of daily cases does surpass 10,000.
And Sunny, one concern is that the proportion of seriously or critically ill patients stands at 2 to 2.5%, according to figures that were mentioned earlier in the day, while the government had secured hospital beds, assuming around 1.6% of such cases among total infections.
Right, I see. And staying with that then, what is the latest with regard to home treatment efforts here?
Right, following the Prime Minister's remark earlier, officials compared the figures of home treatment here in Korea and abroad. Around 2.8%, close to 7%, and around 4.7%. That's the proportion of patients that are currently being hospitalized for COVID-19 in the UK, Singapore, and Germany. So we're seeing single-digit figures here. And in neighboring Japan, it's 13.8%. That meaning the rest, so the majority, are recovering from the virus at home. As some 80% of COVID-19 patients have light or no symptoms based on the characteristics of the virus. Officials say most countries around the world are managing most patients at home. In Korea, the proportion of patients being treated at home stands at an average of 50% in the first week of December, and the rest are being treated at hospitals or community health centers. So with the focus now on home recovery, more manpower is needed too, and here's the government's plan.
We have instructed regional governments to assign administrative personnel, aside from those working at community health centers, to handle home treatment-related tasks. We're working with the Interior Ministry regarding this measure, and many staff members have already been added. We have also set aside a separate budget for next year for nurses and administrative staff needed to maintain home treatment.
Right. Meanwhile, so what has been the trend of transmission among the younger population here?
Well, here in Korea, currently those aged 18 and below, or rather those that are below 18, those account for some 20% of COVID-19 infections. And this is a global trend, not only here in Korea. According to the World Health Organization, in Europe, children between 5 and 14 years have currently the highest rate of COVID-19 infections. In some places, the virus occurred 2 to 3 times more frequently among young children than the average population. And here in Korea, we just heard yesterday on Tuesday of the second COVID-19 related death in a child aged under 10. Now, both of these children were said to have underlying health conditions, according to officials. So this is raising the question on whether we here in Korea can vaccinate our even younger population. But an official said that the deliberation on whether children aged 5 to 11 can be vaccinated cannot be made this year. So we will have to wait a little longer.
Right, until next year then?
Yes.
Right, let's now get some more information on Omicron here. Now, I am aware that information regarding this new variant is evolving, but how much longer do we need to wait before we come across some tangible data on Omicron?
Right, I think it's a question that a lot around the world are asking, and that's why experts say it may take 2 to 3 more weeks for us to get just the exact details. And early data actually suggests that the current COVID-19 vaccines can prevent Omicron patients from developing severe illnesses. Top U.S. infectious disease expert Dr. Anthony Fauci said Omicron is, quote, almost certainly not more severe than Delta. While talking to news outlets on Tuesday, Fauci cited the cohorts that are being followed in South Africa. He said the ratio between the number of infections and the number of hospitalizations seemed to be lower than the Delta variant. He added, though, that Omicron does seem to be much more transmissible, even more so than Delta, because we've seen this variant spread to more than 50 countries in only a month after it was first detected.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, so I understand that Pfizer CEO has said also that Omicron appears to spread faster than do the other variants of COVID-19. Tell us more.
Right, Sunny, and also that the Omicron could lead to further mutations. So speaking to the Wall Street Journal on Tuesday, Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla emphasized that it isn't good news to have something that spreads fast and which could infect billions of people and also lead to create more mutations. He did also mention, though, that the variant does seem to be milder than other previous strains. Pfizer, meanwhile, is currently aiming to develop a vaccine that is targeting Omicron by March next year.
I see. All right, so as always, thank you very much for that. And Yale, thank you for your coverage.
Thank you so much.
This month of December marks 1 year since the start of the world's vaccination campaign against COVID-19. And amid this milestone, Seoul is hosting an exhibition that seeks to share our plight and fight amid the pandemic. I have Chun Song-cho standing by. Song-cho, good to see you again.
Good afternoon, Sunny.
So Song-cho, you are at a photojournalism exhibition. Tell us more.
That's right. Well, more specifically, I'm just outside the Seoul Metropolitan Library that you see right behind me. And if you're wondering, what is she doing outside? What about the exhibition that Sunny was talking about earlier? Well, don't worry, because here it is, the 2021 Seoul International Photojournalism Exhibition moved outside, allowing viewers to stop by and enjoy the pictures as they walk past the library, just like I'm doing right now. So it's not only extremely pedestrian friendly, I mean, obviously the exhibition is literally just on the pedestrian road, but also the concept of an outdoor exhibition is extremely appropriate for the current time, considering the fact that we're in the middle of another wave of COVID-19 right now. So this exhibition actually opened just last month, both on and offline. Under the theme of New Normal Life, it displays 86 photos taken by 68 photojournalists from 12 major news agencies, including AP, AFP, EPA, and the New York Times. 20 photos have been selected to be displayed here out in the open, while the entire collection is exhibited online. And the photos that you'll see at the exhibition are just truly remarkable in the sense that they really captured every moment of the pandemic and also different emotions felt by the people since the pandemic took hold. And I just want to show you an example right here. So this picture was taken by a New York Times photojournalist named Tom Jameson. And this is a photo of a cathedral in Salisbury, England. The picture was taken in January this year. And the cathedral, apparently, if you look into the description, has turned into a vaccination center because of the pandemic. And what's really touching about the story behind this picture is that the organist of the cathedral were playing music at the time for the healthcare workers and the people who are getting vaccinated at the time to give them a sense of relief and comfort. And also, this is a beautiful picture of the frozen Han River. I didn't know that the frozen river was this beautiful. And I want to move your attention to this picture right here. This was taken by another New York Times journalist, Cristobal Olivares. So this shows a subway station in Santiago, Chile in March 2021 this year. And as you can see, the commuter is wearing a face mask. And this picture was actually taken at a time when the Chilean government was regretting about its decision to ease social distancing restrictions too early, because it provided kind of a false sense of confidence and comfort to the people that the worst of the pandemic was already over. So as you can see, these pictures really are like a recap of the past year, showing how people around different parts of the world had to adapt to the new way of life during the pandemic. And I think these beautiful moments, the real moments in life during the pandemic through the camera lens, are very ironical in a way to the harsh reality of the pandemic. And it really offers a chance for people to take a moment to think what they did for the past year to overcome various challenges and obstacles they faced during the pandemic. So for more on this very thought-provoking exhibition, I want to invite an official from the Seoul Metropolitan Government to the show. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right, thank you so much for taking your time to be on our show. So I really love this concept of being out in the open, the exhibition just on display for everyone to see on the road. How did this idea come about?
Thank you. Seoul City hopes that not only people in Korea, but also all around the world can have a look at how people are living amid the pandemic and see how people are overcoming the pandemic as well.
All right, thank you so much for your answer this afternoon. Thank you. All right, so this exhibition, which runs through this coming Sunday, is free of charge to the public. So if you're in town, maybe you can take a little detour to come and take a moment and appreciate these gripping images along the exterior of the library building, because life is enjoying the little moments, the little things in life, especially in times of the pandemic. This has been Chun Sung-cho reporting live from the Seoul Metropolitan Library, and back to Sunny in the studio.
All right, Sung-cho, as always, thank you very much for that coverage. Washington will stage a diplomatic boycott of the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing. The announcement comes ahead of a virtual summit on democracy to be hosted by US President Joe Biden starting tomorrow. That would be Thursday. For more on the latest events on the diplomatic front, I have Professor Min Jung-hoon from the Korean National Diplomatic Academy. Welcome back, Professor Min.
My pleasure.
I also have Professor Im In-jung from Koongju National University. It's a pleasure to have you back, Professor Im.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Right, Professor Min, let's begin with the reason behind Washington's decision to refrain from dispatching a diplomatic delegation to the Beijing Winter Games.
Well, as you mentioned, the Biden administration announced that it will not send any the diplomatic or the official representatives to the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics. And the White House said that the U.S. will diplomatically boycott the Olympics, mainly because of China's human rights abuses, specifically Chinese government's ongoing the genocide and the crimes against humanity in Xinjiang and other human rights abuses. I think basically on the surface, it seems that the U.S. government is making sure that it will not let go Chinese human rights abuses anymore, and because human rights is the universal value that U.S. cares about. But I also think that the diplomatic decision shows that U.S.-China strategic competition is still ongoing and even getting tougher and deeper, although the two countries recently agreed to make a cooperation in several areas like climate change, international trade, Taiwan and North Korea at the virtual meeting between Biden and Xi Jinping. I think that U.S. is taking advantage of the human rights issues to show that U.S. political system is superior to Chinese system, and U.S. also want to use the human rights issues to mobilize its democratic partners and allies to track the rise of China. So I think that China's human rights issues will be deeply discussed in the upcoming Summit for Democracy, and will be used as a way of connecting the participating countries to each other. So anyway, it seems to be inevitable that the U.S.-China relations will be colder and tougher in the coming months.
Right. Professor Im, as Professor Min has just said, Washington's announcement to boycott the Games comes ahead of the two-day virtual summit on democracy, which will be hosted by Mr. Biden, as I mentioned earlier as well. Now, pundits believe a number of countries will share their intentions to join the U.S. boycott campaign, and Australia, for its part, has already announced such intentions. What are your thoughts?
Well, the New Zealand was the first one, and the Lithuania also joined the decision. And as you just mentioned, Australia raised their hand. So now, as of now, 4 countries, well, in addition to U.S., 3 more countries already decided on the diplomatic boycott. Probably Western European democracy might consider this decisions very seriously. For example, again, the United Kingdom, or France-like country, they will consider very seriously. I'm not 100% sure about the Germany's position because their situation might be a little different from, again, the United Kingdom-like country. Or Japan is another probably interesting case to think about because their position is in a very difficult position too. You know, like Korea, for Japan as well, China is the first, the largest trade partner. So economically speaking, they are pretty much dependent on the Chinese market and their industries as well. But at the same time, Japan's this ruling party, again, the Liberal Democratic Party, they are pursuing for pretty much, how would you say, they have a different strategic calculations from more like a liberal or progressive parties in Japan. So having said that, Japan probably, they might be hesitant to take the diplomatic boycott, but probably they can. There is a possibility they can downgrade the level of the diplomat they're gonna send to the Beijing Olympic. Again, we'll see.
Right,
we'll see the situations.
Professor Min, the Chinese embassy in Washington, for its part, has called the diplomatic boycott pretentious, while the foreign ministry in Beijing has said the U.S., and I quote, will pay a price for its boycott of the Winter Games. What acts of retaliation might Beijing be planning?
Well, as expected, the Chinese government strongly responded to the U.S. diplomatic decision. And it seems clear that Chinese government will take countermeasures because if Chinese government does not take any countermeasures, it will definitely get in trouble domestically, and it will also send a message to the international community that Chinese government accepts or admits the human rights problems or abuses in its territory. But it's not clear at this point what options Chinese government will actually use. First, I think the Chinese government will not send its diplomatic representatives to the 2028 LA Summer Olympics. And it could be the most appropriate countermeasure in the principle of reciprocity. But this option takes too long time, 6.5 years to go before it takes place. So I think that along with the possible diplomatic boycott of the LA Summer Olympics, Chinese governments will also consider other options that could take effect in a short time period. So specifically, I think that China maybe will boycott making cooperation with the U.S. that it agreed at the virtual summit between Biden and Xi Jinping, like climate change and international trade.
Right, I see. Professor, let's now turn our focus to the upcoming virtual summit on democracy, which will start tomorrow, Thursday, of course, with some 110 nations at the invitation of the U.S. President. What are the implications of this upcoming summit?
Well, I'd like to bring back the article written by the then candidate, Biden. Last year, spring, he published an interesting article, the why America must lead again through the foreign affairs. According to that article, that was a kind of prelude of the Biden administration's policy. And he highlighted, I think, 2 points. One is, he definitely wants to restore middle class in American society. So he emphasized America's foreign policy should be for middle class, should be for strengthening the middle class. And at the same time, he also emphasized, America's leadership for global governance should be restored too. So having said these 2 points, I think this upcoming summit is definitely for that 2 proposes. Again, it does have some implications for the domestic audience, absolutely. And at the same time, he also wants to show that, again, America is now back on the head of the table. That was actually subtitle of his article. But he is now, America is back on the head of the table. And now they're going to show, we are back for the global governance.
Right, so the purpose of the upcoming virtual summit, Professor Min, is quite clear. And yet there is quite a bit of controversy with regard to the invitation list. Now, among those on the invitation list to this virtual democracy summit are Taiwan and Ukraine. Having said that, some observers believe the summit itself seeks to counter China and Russia. What are your thoughts?
Well, as I briefly mentioned earlier today, I think the Summit for Democracy is a way of the Biden administration bringing its allies and partners around the world together. Right? So I think the Biden administration perceives that democracy has been threatened by the authoritarian regimes like China and Russia, and the U.S. is responsible for restoring democracy around the globe. And I think that democracy and the universal values like human rights provide the political and diplomatic ground that democratic countries and possibly some other countries that U.S. is necessary to bring together can work together. And based on the common ground, the Biden administration argues that democratic countries and partner countries need to set international norms and principles over authoritarian regimes, specifically in the high-tech industries like semiconductors and batteries. So I think that Biden administration continues to emphasize democracy and universal values like human rights to mobilize its allies and partners around the world in other areas the U.S. will fiercely compete with China in the coming months and years.
Right, and as Professor Min has mentioned about US's intentions to mobilize its allies, among those on that list now, Professor Im, are Brazil and the Philippines. Both leaders, of course, have engaged in certain actions that challenge democracy. What are your thoughts?
Well, COVID-19 pandemic changed the world. For example, digitalization was accelerated. This fourth industrial revolution was accelerated, which means, all this geoeconomics or geopolitics can change a lot. Many experts said so, but the thing is, if we see there's all this, the participants list, it reminds me of the Cold War situations. Again, for example, Zbigniew Brzezinski, one of the most, well-known strategists of the United States. He has that famous book, Grand Chessboard. That reminds me of that book. So again, the Philippines is definitely important, strategically speaking, right? Because it's literally in the South China Sea. In Brazil too, if you think about the BRICS, the countries who worked together, probably U.S. might have another calculation, right, to handle again the so-called threat or challenge from the China. So even though the United States, Washington doesn't explicitly say that this is against the China, but implicitly, I do think it's already shows its intention.
Right. Meanwhile, Professor Min, do tell us a bit about Tuesday's virtual conference between Mr. Biden and his Russian counterpart, Mr. Vladimir Putin.
Well, first I want to say that I don't think first the timing of the U.S. Russia the virtual summit has I don't think that it has much to do with the upcoming Summit for Democracy. I think it's possibly and mostly the coincidental. And instead, I think that having the summit has more to do with the current Ukraine situation. Recently, as you know, it is known that Russia increased its military capabilities around its border with Ukraine. And so the US and its European allies are deeply concerned about the Russia's military moves and another attack of Russia toward the Ukraine in the coming months. So I think that the two leaders of the US and Russia just mainly exchanged their opinions about the current Ukraine situations, and they just confirmed their own postures and opinions about that. So they failed to make a compromise or they reduce the gap they have over the issue of Ukraine. So the U.S. the President Biden just emphasized the possible the economic sanctions if the Russia attacks the Ukraine, and Russia doesn't want to take the burden about that. So they just exchanged their opinions.
Right. Professor Im, the U.S. meanwhile has also stressed that there is no pressure on its allies to pick a side amid its tensions with China. How do you interpret this particular stance?
Well, I think we can take it just as it is, because U.S. now, the Biden administration, they do have an intention. They don't want to twist the arms of their allies, like their predecessor did. So in that sense, I want to take it just as it is. Of course, Washington might be sympathetic with the situations of Korea-like country or Japan-like country. Again, economically speaking, we are very much dependent on China, and strategically too, we definitely need the support and help from China whenever we deal with the North Korea-related issue. So Washington knows this situations very well, and they know, I think, our difficult position. But the thing is, we need to be very careful because we don't want to be offensive to anyone, right? So this is probably a very difficult situation. So probably our wisdom, we definitely need our wisdom here. How can we really
navigate these waters?
Exactly.
Right.
Thank you.
Professor Min, Seoul and Beijing, meanwhile, are working to arrange a virtual summit now. When do you suppose will this meeting take place, and what are its implications amid the standoff between Beijing and Washington?
Well, personally, I think that the virtual meeting between South Korea and China will be held before the Beijing Winter Olympics, possibly around January next year. And personally, I think that the two countries have their own interest to have the summit around the Beijing Winter Olympics. First, on the Chinese side, under the situation where the U.S. will diplomatically boycott the Beijing Olympics, and the other Western countries possibly will join it. So China badly wants South Korea to send its diplomatic representatives to the Winter Olympics. And to that end, holding a summit with South Korea could be a useful way of encouraging South Korea not to join the diplomatic boycott. Meanwhile, South Korea want to use the Beijing Winter Olympics as a momentum to facilitate the resumption of the nuclear talks with North Korea and revitalize the Korean Peninsula, the peace process. And as you know, China has been playing an important role in the North Korea coming out to the negotiating table, and China can also contribute to making progress or moving forward for the end of war declaration. So the bottom line here is that having a summit will contribute to the maintaining a good relationship between South Korea and China. And when we consider South Korea's national interest, on the basis of the strong alliance with the U.S., maintaining a good relationship with China is also important for South Korea to preserve its own economic interests and strategic values between U.S. and China.
Right. Professor Im, just as Professor Min just mentioned, the Moon administration, that is, has been pushing for an end-of-war declaration on the Korean Peninsula. How do tensions between China and the U.S. look to affect this peace initiative?
Well, originally, again, all the series of Olympic here in East Asia, Pyeongchang, and then Tokyo, and then Beijing, we expected that the series of this Olympic Games can be a very good chance for us, and not only for us, for anyone here in this region to just accelerate the dialogue with the North or with anyone who needs the dialogue. So, but the thing is, again, the corona pandemic changed the situation, dramatically changed the situation. So Tokyo Olympic was like that already. And considering the Omicron variant, Beijing Olympic, I want to be optimistic, but I cannot be that optimistic having had all the situations. So COVID situation is definitely one big negative variable. So having said that, again, I'm very, sorry about all this bad timing. Again, this incumbent government is ending, and all this Korea's society, our society is all focusing on the upcoming election. So, and the U.S.'s, decision is already pretty much obvious. So having had all this situation, it looks like it's very, very difficult to expect the declaration can be made. Mm-hmm.
I see. All right, Professor Im, as always, thank you very much for your thoughts, and Professor Min, thank you very much for your insight today.
Thank you.
Right, and on that note, we say goodbye. Do join us again, same time tomorrow, that is Thursday, for more coverage. Thank you for now.